On this week's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, we are featuring a special leader segment with Honda Canada. Today, we are joined by Jean Marc Leclerc, President and CEO. Let's get into today's leader segment. Like many of us who love cars, Jean Marc Leclerc's fascination with automobiles began as a child, on long summer car trips from Ottawa to northern Quebec with his family. The seed that was planted on those drives has grown into a 35-year career in the Canadian automotive industry, the last 25 of which has been spent at Honda Canada. As President and CEO of Honda Canada, Jean Marc now has the opportunity to share this passion with a new generation of Canadians. He is responsible for setting the overall direction for Honda in Canada, as well as leading all of the company's business operations. Jean Marc feels strongly that there's never been a more interesting time to lead a Canadian automotive company. Now let's get into the episode with Jean Marc. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Really good to be here.
It is great to be back and another fantastic guest on our session today.
Agreed. Today we're joined by Jean Marc Leclerc, President and CEO at Honda Canada. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Jean Marc, I have to tell you, this is a real pleasure to have you on board. For our listeners that are around the world, this is a treat because they're going to learn about Honda Canada, and the investment that you're making in the EV manufacturing world and the impact it's going to have on the whole chain. And so we're really excited to have you here. I also want to let our listeners know that Honda, Jean Marc, is co-hosting with 360 Energy. We're having a CEO roundtable talking to selective businesses that have impacts on the infrastructure, energy infrastructure coming up. And we're looking to get conversations going so we can advance this energy transition, which not only does Honda need as they go forward, but so does the rest of society. So, Jean Marc, thank you again for this. I'll start off with a question. And the question is, what is your vision for Honda Canada's role in shaping the automotive industry?
Thanks for the question. That's a great question. Really, for us, we want to be a company that Canadians want to exist. Now, that casts a pretty wide net, but what it means is that it kind of stays in touch with what is important to Canadians in the context of our business. And obviously now it's all about the energy transition and what it means to our industry. So there's a heavy focus on that. And I can tell you that, I've been with the company more than 25 years. And I remember joining Honda and the emphasis that they put on as the world's largest engine manufacturer, but the importance on environmental sustainability in that context. And, it struck me because I was in the industry for 10 years prior to that. And the importance that they placed at that time, again, that was a long time ago, struck me. And again, that is true today. So I can really say that environmental sustainability, environmental concern for our activities, the product we sell, has been with Honda for a long time. It's really part of the DNA. And it's something, again, in the context of this transition, that we're really trying to live up to and maybe raise the bar quite a few notches based on the current state of the world, if you will, relative to the environment.
Well, can I ask you a question here? What inspired you? I suppose this is really quite a personal question. What inspired you to take an active role in Honda's energy transition, and how do you see it shaping the company's future?
I always say, my first allegiance is to the company, is to Honda. My second allegiance is to the country. And when I saw that a lot of decisions were being made about what the company needed to do to transition, where things were going to be built, who was going to be part of that transition, or at least who was going to take the lead globally, it really inspired me to take action, if you will, to ensure that Canada was considered in the decision making. Canada is important as an auto manufacturer in the Honda world. We're the fourth largest market for Honda in the automobile business. Obviously, with motorcycle, things are a little different. We sell a lot of motorcycles, for example, in India, 6 million of them a year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty staggering. But for me, it really was the opportunity to, number one, I think, stabilize our operations in Canada, and number two, enhance them and make sure that Canada was part of the global solution for many decades to come. So that was my inspiration, if you will. Again, Honda's number one. Number two, I'm a Canadian. I'm a Canadian CEO in a Canadian company. And that really, I would say, triggered me to take action, to engage our government also, and engage our government with players with our company leadership globally to ensure that Canada was considered, that they understood all the advantages that Canada could offer in that transition, whether it be clean energy, the abundance of raw materials, the skilled labor, obviously the proximity to the largest market in the world, which I don't think we need to spell that out to anyone. But again, in the context of putting all the pieces of that puzzle together, I think it was important to do that as decisions were being made as to who was going to play this active role in that transition. So I would say that was the what I would say triggered me to take action, again, making sure that Canadian interests were considered in that process.
Thank you.
Mark, the idea that you had or made this initiative happen, I wish and hope we have more CEOs across Canada that do the same thing. Because as you conveyed, and John knows this because he's been over here many, many times, so we have one of the cleanest grids in the world. And not only do we have the resources for mining to allow for that to happen, but we've got the grid, and then we've got a ton of technical know-how and academia that can support this. So I just want to applaud you and Honda, I guess ultimately yourself, because someone has to lead this thing. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I think, listen, I always kind of temper the comment. I guess because listen, this is a global initiative, right? This is Honda globally deciding that Canada was going to be, that destination because of all those advantages. Of course, we needed to reinforce that with the decision makers, and again, whether that be, at Honda, and again, inspiring perhaps our leadership to inspire our leadership about Canada, to sell Canada. What I did is really to make sure that there was consideration, which again, when you're looking at the geopolitical situation, the Inflation Reduction Act of the U.S., which weighed very heavy in terms of the dollars that were made available, and where that kind of left Canada in terms of that level of support and what they needed to do to make, to attract those investments. That was really my role. Once there was interest, once that was established, I think it naturally kind of happened that, the global office, came to Canada, investigated, making sure that, the country could live up to that promise, if you will. And I think it took a life of its own from there. So, but I think that initial raise your hand strongly was pretty critical in the process because decisions were being made very, very quickly. One of the key, I would say, characteristics of this transition is how fast things need to happen. You've got compliance issues in certain countries, including our own, the United States, certain states, that really forces you to react very quickly, to make those investment decisions with speed. And of course, with that, sometimes, without the benefit of time, if you will, more time, sometimes you move to decisions without having a fulsome assessment. And I think that's why it was necessary to make sure that, the strong hand raising to make sure Canada was considered. So I would say that was my role, and from there on in, then it was basically a discussion. I hate to call it a negotiation. It was really a discussion with the government to say, how can we make this happen here? And being the intermediary between the government and the company was the role following that decision that Canada was to be considered.
So if I can go based on this discussion, how can Honda contribute to Canada's growth, development, but economically and environmentally because of the massive growth and expansion that actually Honda is looking at Canada doing on the EV side?
Well, let me talk about environmentally first in terms of the contribution. Honda has an ambition, if you will, that they call triple action to zero. And what that means is the company is committing by 2050 to use 100% clean energy, renewable energy, zero emissions from our products. And that's not automobile. This is our entire product line, motorcycle, power equipment, and finally, resource recirculation. How can we reutilize some of the resources in our products? So that is the commitment. And again, this is not greenwashing. I think a lot of people love to use this, things that you say publicly today that people say, do you really have those intentions? I can tell you, again, because of Honda's past and the importance they put into environmental interests, if you will, this is just an extension of that moving into the future. And they're taking action right now to make sure they can live up to the triple action to zero ambition. And of course, that starts with Canada. And Canada, as I said earlier, that it has all those components that will allow us to live up to that ambition and move towards that ambition. What we're building in Canada, the value chain that we're building from mining to the production of batteries, EVs, and resource circulation and recycling. This is I would say, I don't know that it's been done anywhere else in the world to the extent that we're doing in one jurisdiction, right? So again, Canada kind of gives us that opportunity to do that. The second opportunity for us is that we're starting with a clean slate. So in other words, we're not repurposing our plants or retooling our plants, existing plants, because you can never fully achieve those high goals by doing that. So in Canada, we're really starting with a clean slate. So we're going to have, yes, we're building where we have two existing plants that build, Civic hybrids, CRV hybrids, but those are two standalone plants. So when we're looking at, for example, the zero impact for our operations in terms of carbon, if we have the opportunity to basically build that into the plant from day one. For example, we're looking at geothermal, we're looking at energy storage, we're looking at different solutions that will allow us again to move more rapidly than if we were to retool existing plans on older platforms. So that's I think the opportunity ahead of us. And listen, we're going to be looking for partners in the process that can help us accelerate those plans and towards those ultimate objectives that we have. And the other important thing of note to Canada, and I think it's a feather in our cap, usually Canada's a recipient of technologies coming from elsewhere. Canada now is going to be the showcase in terms of manufacturing that will be exported to other Honda companies around the world. We're going to be the showcase, if you will. So that's a little different approach than I would say what traditionally happens. Having said that, again, there's involvement of the global office, Honda Motors in Tokyo. There's involvement from the regional office. I mean, this is a massive undertaking. And again, a lot of uncharted territory when it comes to building our own batteries. That's the other important thing, where we have partnerships with battery manufacturers, but in this particular case, we're developing our own batteries that we're going to build here in Canada with new manufacturing processes that are going to be, again, moving towards a zero carbon emission. So that is I would say the environmental promise or opportunity ahead of us. The economic one, again, building a value chain means that you're going to become the center of excellence, quite frankly, for Honda. That will no doubt attract more investments, whether it be within Honda, but I think, again, that $15 billion investment that we're making, I think got a lot of attention globally. I think a lot of people that may not have considered Canada now are saying, well, that's interesting. It's a major global player now looking at Canada to make those investments. So there's no doubt that there's going to be the ripple effect of having a project like the one we have on the Canadian economy. So two critical components to battery manufacturing. And of course, our two plants, the EV plant and the manufacturing plants, which will be side by side. And the other, I would say, element to it is we're going to be temporarily employing 3,500 people to make all this happen. So that's a lot of employment for the region, for the province, for Canada. The key for us is finding all these people in a short amount of time, because we don't have a lot of time. I keep on emphasizing that. We're 2024. We want to have our first BEV off the line in 2028. That's not a lot of time. It's a massive undertaking with massive investments in a very short period of time, requiring a lot of people to come together in harmony. But we're going to make it happen. We're putting all the pieces together. This is not our first plant, obviously, globally. but it is going to be the first that is going to be dedicated to the new way of manufacturing EVs moving forward. Modular, flexible, digital is what we call it. MFD is what we call the new process. So we're excited about that. It's going to be the future. And more importantly, it's in Canada. We're going to be the showcase for the world, which is very exciting for us in Canada, for the team in Canada, and for me personally, being a little selfish. So
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
It's interesting what you were saying there. I've had a long involvement with manufacturing industry, and I used to work for a large management consultancy, part of one of a large firm of accountants. And during that time, the thing that we were promoting was Japanese manufacturing technology, just in time, all the things that had come out from the Japanese automotive companies. And I thought it was really nice to hear you saying, and now Canada will be the sort of the best practice benchmark. It's an interesting world, isn't it?
it certainly is, and things are evolving, obviously. But I must say that, listen, we were the first Japanese manufacturer to build cars in Canada. And of course, over the
Right.
years, we've developed a workforce and generations of workforce that have been responsible for all the accolades that Honda Canada manufacturing have received. This, in no small part, played also a role as to where things are going to happen, because we're going to need to transition that workforce that we believe is very capable of that transition from building, CRVs, hybrid Civics, to building EVs moving forward. So it's really also a testament of the evolution, if you will, of the company's involvement with Canada, if you will, and what came
Mm.
out of it. And of course, the proof is always in the results that you get from the workforce and from the Canadian market.
Yeah, you've touched on this a bit, but can I ask you about some, could you perhaps tell us about some initiatives that Honda Canada is undertaking to promote sustainability and innovation in the automotive sector?
No, absolutely. I'm going to bring you back to what I said earlier about the opportunity that's ahead of us relative to starting with a clean sheet of paper. And as we're building a plant, making sure that, again, we live up to the promise of, again, using clean energy, clean methods, if you will, zero waste to landfill. All these things are going to be part of that, of the process. And again, we are looking for suppliers or new ideas coming from suppliers, hopefully Canadian suppliers, to help us. There's obviously a lot of interest in our project. As a matter of fact, it's become a full-time job just answering, those expressions of interest through emails or phone calls. But a lot of those ideas are very interesting. They sparked, of course, there's things that we're thinking about as Honda, but there's a lot of companies that specialize in different areas that will absolutely help us, maybe even accelerate or even better what we had originally anticipated. So that we're looking forward to that. What I can tell you right now is we have built a giant geothermal field where the plant is going to be located. I'm told by those that it is certainly the largest in Ontario, possibly the largest in Canada, but that hasn't been verified. So I use that with a little bit of caution. But again, this is just one of the examples of how we're thinking about these things, not after the fact, but sort of planning to make sure that it is part of the project so that we can reduce, again, our reliance on fossil fuels to heat and to cool our operations at the plant. So this is just one of the examples. The other thing I can tell you, as far as us promoting innovation, one of the questions that's often asked is, how do you engage your people in the process? First of all, those who have been with Honda for a long time have come to the same realization that I have, is that there's a constant emphasis on environmental concerns about our operation, about our products, and how we improve. So what's important for us right now is to have a mechanism to engage new ideas and innovation. We used to have a process called NH Circle that have been with us for a long time, which encourages associates to get together as a cross-functional team to deal with either opportunities, challenges, and again, present that to upper management with, again, the hopes of implementing that idea. And the company is now in the process of I would say, evolving to put more speed in the process and to bring those ideas to top management more rapidly. And listen, we have good engagement with NH Circle. We always have. I think associates are going to be very encouraged by, hey, you have an idea. We want to know right away. And if it gets traction, it's not going to be, hey, we're going to implement it maybe sometime in the future. The idea is we're going to move it forward with the support of management. So I think that'll trigger a lot of interest, engagement, which is extremely important by the associates. So we're really excited about, again, that next phase, if you will, of idea generation from our associate population. The other thing I will say, this is sort of outside of manufacturing, our foundation, Honda Canada Foundation, our philanthropic activities, one of the key pillars is environment. So we support organizations that, Earth Rangers is one that comes to mind, for example, in Canada, that we support. We even have a process with our dealers called the Green Dealer Program. So we're even engaging our dealer body. And what it is, it's a company that does an assessment of their energy consumption, if you will, at the dealerships and gives them ideas on how to reduce their energy. And of course, with that comes, cost savings. I think we have over 90% of our dealers that are engaged in the process and again, enjoying the benefits. So again, it's not just, it's manufacturing, it's also associate engagement, it's also philanthropic, and also, engaging our dealer networks in the process.
Thank you.
It's actually a great segue to the next question, Jean Marc, and that is, why is it so crucial for senior management to support this energy transition? And how do you encourage your team to embrace these changes?
Well, again, I think it's like anything. If you've been with a company for any length of time, I think it's becoming very obvious that this is important. This is the direction of the company. We reinforce this by calling this transition what we call the second founding of the company. This is not the Honda of old. We're turning a new page. Let's look at this like we're starting a brand new company and having an entrepreneurial mindset, right? Still staying true to our, I would say, our DNA, to our culture, but in the context of what's next. And I think that speaks very strongly, and we reinforce that. We have an intranet or what we call an associate office called Pit Stop. And anything that we're doing globally that ties into environmental, well, any initiative really, but many of them these days having to do with this particular topic, that gets reinforced with associates. Every time I have a town hall, which happens quarterly in my case, we stream that to all associates across the country. They have an opportunity to ask questions. And again, that's another opportunity to emphasize the second founding, what it means, why it's important, and why it's important for them to get engaged. So again, it's reinforcement, repetition, constantly supporting through actions, and again, through our communication strategy, the corporate direction. And I don't think you will find an associate that would be oblivious to what we're trying to achieve. I think we've been very successful in our change management process in terms of emphasizing the need for speed, the need to do this, and the need for their engagement in the process.
So that's built into your culture, and I have exposure to Honda's culture, as John conveyed, about sort of the Japanese practices. But certainly senior management has to, there's a role, because all your employees see that you're actually walking the talk as well. Because there's a lot of organizations that John and I have exposure to where things are stated by senior management and then they move on and it's forgotten. But it seems to me, just based on our conversation and the investment that Honda's making, that senior management is it's a commitment. As you said, it's a new foundation, right?
Well, it's not a mission statement that, you talk about at a retreat, never to be spoken again. I mean, they see it through actions. And again, as long as they see in this case, the massive investment, the massive commitment the company is making. Sometimes you have to remind people that, we kind of use billions very loosely these days, but we have to tell them that, by the way, 1 billion is $1,000 million, right? Just to put, because I think people lose a little bit of the context of what that means. So, of course, when they hear this, again, it's not just about listening to the message. If you're, an associate that may not be involved directly in those activities, but they see the actions that's supporting the words, and I think that's where you get traction. Where you don't get traction is that every once in a while you mention it, but they don't really see how that kind of materializes, if you will, in through the company actions and strategies.
Right.
When we're looking at the future, we're so often very easily looking at 2050, which is an awful long way away, and there's a lot that could happen between now and then. So can we sort of look for the next 10 years, and what do you think are the big challenges and opportunities for you at Honda, and in particular, what role is electrification going to play in that?
Yeah. Well, at Honda, we believe electrification is the future. Certainly, the technology is going to evolve. There's no doubt about that. It's going to get better. There may be other solutions, greener solutions, but certainly we see this as the way forward. One of the questions that's often asked to me is, well, you're making this massive investment when things seem to be slowing down or seem to have achieved a certain plateau. And I always have to remind them, we're not doing it for what's happening today. We're doing it what's going to happen in 2028 and beyond. But I will ask you a question like this. It's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a bumpy road. We're being asked as an industry to take action to bring these vehicles to market. What I can speak for the industry, if you will, to say the concern, generally speaking, is that the pieces of the ecosystem to ensure that adoption, I think, is where we're going to run into some issues. And I talk often to people in government to say, there needs to be I would say, a harmonization. We're asked to move at a certain speed. None of the other pieces of that ecosystem is moving at the same speed. Whether it be strengthening the grid, it really concerns me when I talk to either mayors of cities or, at conferences or even, people in the industry, because we build cars. We don't have visibility to the other things we're relying on for the adoption of our products. And sometimes I hear concerning tones, if you will. Well, yeah, we know we have to do it, big investments. We're not sure we're going to be able to move as quickly enough. And so, of course, we have to sell them. And we're building those massive plants with massive investments. So I always say that the government, somebody needs to play a coordinating role to make sure the charging infrastructure is there, that we find solutions for what we call garage orphans, which represent about 35% of the Canadian population. That's not clear to me. Those involved in building codes to make sure that whatever's being built is going to include charging capabilities. The grid, we talked about that. There's also an education for consumers that I think is a critical component, because there's a lot of myths. People love to talk about, bad situations that get amplified that are not necessarily representative 90% of the experience with an EV. So it's a combination of things that I think it's kind of a quilt that is not well coordinated. And I think government could play a role. Now, we always think, well, that's a provincial jurisdiction, or that's municipal, but somebody has to play a role. But not moving at the same speed in a coordinated fashion is just going to make the transition more difficult. And more difficult means that, the next wave of consumers who are interested in buying an EV, may be reading more bad stories that may dissuade them from taking the jump. So I think that's what I mean by a bumpy road. Having said that, we will achieve. We will get there. There's absolutely no doubt. The industry, I think, is moving very quickly. I can speak for Honda. We're moving extremely quickly. We think it is the future of mobility in general, not just automotive. It's going to be mobility in general. Because I failed to mention that Honda, the solution for Honda in places like India, for example, I mentioned 6 million motorcycles sold a year. It's the main mode of transportation. They're looking at battery swapping, for example, as being the solution, and Honda's partnering with competitors to standardize. Right? So again, those are the solutions. It's mobility in general, and I can tell you the opportunity for us is tremendous. Knowing that the progression towards the ultimate goal may be a little bumpy. It's going to head there. Canada's involved. There is no doubt in my mind there's going to be more investments coming to Canada as a result of building this center of excellence here in Canada. And I'm talking about Honda, but others also have made that decision to be active here in that transformation. And it's extremely exciting because what it does is that it secures the manufacturing footprints that took a long time to develop, and now making sure that in this transition we protect it and grow it moving forward.
Jean Marc, you talked about this a little bit, but I wonder if we can dig into it a little more detail for our listeners. And so, can you convey where Honda Canada sits more broadly inside Honda globally as it relates to manufacturing EVs in Canada?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm not necessarily privy to all the plans that we have going on globally. What I can tell you is, again, building a full value chain in Canada is certainly a first for Honda. We think it's a first globally for any manufacturers in one jurisdiction I'm talking about, as opposed to having different pieces coming together from different places. So I think Canada's going to play an even more important role from that perspective. Again, we are going to be the where the new technology for manufacturing, for battery manufacturing also is going to happen here and then get exported to other Honda companies around the world. Again, that's a first. And so I think our prominence, our importance is going to, as a result, is going to increase. I think Canada's going to be relied upon to provide probably some of the skill set that we're going to be developing to help others, again, make that transition. I mean, it's happening to a certain degree now. I could see that being even further enhanced as we expand the manufacturing base to build EVs in different areas of the world. So again, building that center of excellence here and being sort of the first to, again, to start with that clean slate, and not just manufacturing. Again, in terms of the building of those factories, and again, a greener way of doing that, I think we're going to be relied upon to share the experience and some of the technologies that we used in the process.
Something we often say on this podcast is if you're not leading and getting in front of this transition, you will get left behind. As CEO of a leading manufacturer in Canada, what do you think needs to happen in Canada to become an energy transition leader in the world?
Well, I think Canada needs to live up to the promise, right? I think our politicians have, certainly in Ontario and Canada, François-Philippe Champagne on the federal side, Vic Fedeli on provincial side in Ontario, they've sold Canada hard with different players around the world. We need to live up to the promise, clean energy, those skilled labor, having enough of that skilled labor, which is, again, a little bit of do we have enough? Because a lot of activity is going to happen at the same time. Also the abundance of minerals and precious metals, but there's a lot of work to do in Canada to make sure we live up to that promise, and how fast we can get those mines developed to support the activities, in our case, from mining to the manufacturing. So a lot of work to do. We're going to get there. I think, when you have governments whose policies sort of align with the objectives that you have, sometimes it's frustrating because things are not moving quickly enough, but certainly a lot of discussions, a lot of people coming together to understand what needs to happen, what their role should be. And I think we are definitely moving in the right direction. And I'm confident that with continued support from the government, I think that's also important, that the government continues to support not just the manufacturers, but all the players that are part of that solution, if you will, that are part of that ecosystem. That needs to continue on a go-forward basis. So, anything that would put I would say, an obstacle in the way or concerns me a little bit, and that happens typically with changes in government, changes in points of view, the geopolitical pressure that we're seeing now with what's happening in the United States, for example. and what may happen as a result. At the end of the day, what it means to us is staying nimble, staying flexible. In the end, we need to respond. We work with any government that's in power. We need to respond, but I think we need to respond in the way that, you know, we're moving towards our objective. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of responding to our customers and what they want. That's about staying in business. That's about going through the transition in a sustainable way. Because as you can imagine, massive investments in a short period of time, the risks involved with all the geopolitical play going on is it's a serious risk that you need to manage along the way. But you want to do that without losing focus of the ultimate goal, and that's what we're trying to do. But I will say again, governments need to play a leading role, and I don't know who. I kind of leave it more open-ended, but I would have to say the federal government, since the mandate is a federal mandate in terms of ZEV adoption, but also we have provinces that are even more aggressive with Quebec and BC, is that they need to make sure they play a coordinating role. We're mandated, right, to sell a certain percentage, but the pieces of that ecosystem is not. There's a sense that things are going to happen organically, and I don't think they're going to happen organically without having some push and pull as required, so that, as I said earlier, things can be well coordinated, well oiled, coming together, and again, given that confidence to people to make that transition. Because EVs are fabulous. I don't know if you had the opportunity to drive them. There's not a whole lot not to like about them, other than learning to live with them, with some of the gaps that exist today. We need to make those go away as quickly as possible.
Now, to end off this great episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is, at one time I will say Honda was seen as a laggard in the electrification move. And I think we've demonstrated, and we had our reasons, we thought the adoption was going to be a lot slower, that people were going to transition to hybrids and then plug-in hybrids. And so we had a more measured approach. And of course, decisions from regulations prompted us to move more quickly and to make sure that we make it happen more quickly. But now I think the opportunity for Honda is really to take the lead. And I think we've shown that the speed with which we're moving, the commitment, despite kind of the slowdown, and Honda hasn't announced any slowdown in its plans, if you will, to move forward. That's the difference in the public's mind, is that Honda now is moving very, very quickly. And I think living up to a lot of expectations that people have of Honda as being an engineering-focused company that people would probably look to lead the way. And I think what we're demonstrating now is that we are leading the way. And we're very excited about what the future holds for our second founding. So we're excited about that. And I want people to remember that Honda will definitely be lead the way in that transition.
Thanks for that. John, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think my biggest takeaway is I mentioned been involved with manufacturing industry for an awful long time. And so often you see people trying to make incremental improvements from a rather shaky base. And the idea of rethinking processes when you're going to be making a new product and putting it in a new plant and starting with that clean sheet of paper, it takes courage, it takes a commitment, but I think it's the kind of step that we need. We need more people making that kind of step.
Thanks for that, John. Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
3 items. Jean-Claire was
You're only
talking
allowed
about
one.
sorry. Jean Marc was saying about this is now a new milestone for Honda, that they have now changed and moving to the EV. That's a commitment. That's a change. The idea that Canada becomes the center of excellence, I can't tell you how thrilled I know John and I are, because we've been talking about this whole mindset of center of excellence. So the fact that Jean Marc's saying that, and that's where Honda's going and will lead, that's just fantastic. The last item, which I know we've talked in many podcasts, is that we need more people collectively to work on this transition. Because as Jean Marc said, he can build these plants, but if they don't have the infrastructure in place, it's a problem. And so clearly that's a lot of activity that needs to be done, coordinated, whether it's government, but I also believe people, CEOs like Jean Marc, collectively working can help make that happen too. So it's been a fantastic session, Jean Marc. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great week, Jean Marc, David, and John. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Been really good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.